Kevin.
Hi, I'm Melissa.
And this is
The Jaywalkers Recovery Podcast. Hi, this is Melissa with the Jaywalkers Recovery Podcast. And today we have Jamee T. Sobriety date is 4/10/2009. Hi, Jamie.
Hi, Melissa.
How's it going?
Good. A little nervous.
Yeah. I get it. Me too, a little bit.
Yeah.
But I'm super glad that you're here, and I'm excited to hear your story again. It's been a really long time, so
It has.
Yeah.
Super honored that you thought of me to do this. So thank you.
yeah. And I've known you forever too.
Yeah.
I was thinking, like, man, probably my whole sobriety.
I think so.
Yeah.
I definitely before you could drive, right?
Yes, and that's what I remember too. Is I remember I didn't have a license,
Yep.
and I didn't have a car, and I would have to ask for rides to meet people. And I remember you had like a minivan, right?
I did.
And I remember your dog Noah
Yep.
was a puppy.
Yes.
Yes. Oh.
I know. We just lost him last year. So,
Oh.
yeah,
Yeah. So yeah, it's been a long time.
it has lots of life.
Yes. So, okay. So, yeah. So, if we want to start, just, from the beginning, what it was like, and then what happened and what it's like now.
Yeah. So my drinking and using career started when I was 15 years old. I was in high school and I was able to be friends with many different crowds of people, right? I feel like I was with the jocks and the stoners and whatever. It didn't really matter. I've always been a chameleon that way, which I think most alcoholics are. So I was 15 years old and I had a friend who thought it would be really cool to get me stoned. Back up to say that my mom was a teacher. She's retired, but she was a teacher. And so I think it was kind of cool to think like, oh, I'm going to get this teacher's daughter stoned. So I was like, okay, fine. So we go across the street from the school. We smoke pot. I don't even know if I'm stoned or not. Like, I just keep smoking. And he's like, well, spit. And so I try to spit. I can't spit. He's like, yep, you're stoned. And then we go to English class. I grew up, my mom was a health teacher. And my parents didn't really drink very much because alcoholism ran so prevalently in both sides of the family. So they would drink occasionally. I think maybe once a year they would have friends come over. But it was always ingrained in me that I had alcoholism as a trait, a potential trait, and that it ran in the family and it was genetic. And there wasn't really much of an explanation on what that meant, just that I was probably going to be an alcoholic if I drank. So the first time that I drank, I grew up in Forest Grove and we would always go to the woods. And the amount of alcohol that we had depended on who was able to buy it. And usually we'd get to the woods and that was all that we had, right? Case of beer, whatever it was that we could acquire because we're 15 years old. So we're out in the woods and I notice that we're running low. And so I start hiding alcohol in the bushes. But I don't want to drink by myself. So I'm taking like one friend with me to the bushes to this stash of alcohol that I've hidden. And everybody else passed out. And I spent the entire night drunk, walking in a circle around the campfire. And I didn't want to go to sleep. I didn't want to not feel that way. I'm pretty confident that the first time people drink, they aren't concerned about running out. And they aren't concerned about not feeling that way, right? But those were the two things that stood out to me. So I went through high school. I drank every opportunity that I could. I graduated from high school and I started doing meth. The guy that I was dating at the time did meth. And so I thought, well, I will too, because then he'll like me more. And I got pregnant with my daughter like 3 years into that. And only by the grace of God, I was able to quit using meth when I found out that I was pregnant. I know that's not most people's story, and I've always been grateful for that. So I had my daughter. I think I was around 21 or 22. It's hard for me. We've kind of touched on this before. It's hard for me because I have been intoxicated for so much of my adult life, and I have so many relapses and attempts at sobriety that it all gets jumbled up, and I forget. So if you know me and you know my story and I'm telling something out of order, it's not intentional. I just don't remember. So um, I left my daughter's dad and started drinking. So he had her, I had the sweetest schedule. He had her Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and every other Sunday. So I was at the bar Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and every other Sunday. Um, and that continued for quite a while. I then started dating a bartender, which really helped my drinking career. I moved away from Forest Grove into Beaverton, which for us local folks, it's really funny. Like that was my geographic, right? 20 miles. I was like, I got to get out of Forest Grove. That's the problem. So I moved to Beaverton and then I proceeded to still drive to my favorite bar in Forest Grove. So now, like, I'm driving intoxicated for a much longer distance. Shouldn't have been driving intoxicated anyway, but now I'm going from Forest Grove to Beaverton. Started dating a bartender. So I would just hang out with him whenever he was at work. I was at the bar. I got to drink for free. And he had an opiate addiction. And at that point in time, drinking was all that I did. Um, and I remember the first couple times I did opiates, I hated them. They messed with my drinking buzz. They made me sick. Um, but I remember there was one moment where I was standing in the shower and I thought to myself, well, if he likes the effect, then it must be something good. So I'm going to keep taking these pills until I like it. And that's exactly what I did. Um, that relationship got really toxic really quick. It was verbally and physically abusive, and the abuse wasn't one sided. I would black out, I would get high, and I wouldn't be able to control my emotions. And so he and I had an apartment together. We had my daughter the majority of the time, and we got into a huge fight one night. By this time in my career, I wasn't able to work. Luckily, he had a huge, what's that called when you are left like money? Yes, inheritance. Thank you. So neither of us had to work. I could just take opiates and drink all day. And we got into a huge fight. My daughter was at her dad's house, another godshot. I was throwing lamps. He was throwing stuff. We both called the cops on each other. And he left the house. And the police officer, this is one of the only things that I remember from that night, was that the police officer looked me in the eye and said, if your daughter would have been here, she would be in protective custody right now. And so my boyfriend at the time left our apartment and our relationship was done, right? So when he walked out, my rent walked out, my phone bill walked out, my means to acquire opiates, alcohol, cigarettes, all of it was gone. And that was my only concern. It wasn't about this relationship of 3 years that had walked out the door. It was all of those things. So I called my dad and I said, Dad, I need to go to treatment. I had no other options. And as a parent, I know now that my parents had been waiting 15 years to hear those words, right? And I wish that that was when I got sober. I wish that that could be their moment. It just wasn't. So my dad came over. He helped me pack up all the important stuff in my apartment and took me to their house. And it took I think, a week and a half, 2 weeks to get me a bed at a recovery center in Newburgh. And my parents do not do drugs. Again, they do not drink. They allowed me to smoke pot in their home. And my mom was going to Costco and buying cases of O'Doul's. So I literally sat in this like recliner in their living room, just smoking pot and drinking O'Doul's. I mean, the image, right? These things that like seem normal to me. I mean, I was drinking O'Doul's like I was going to get drunk from it. That's I was drinking O'Doul's alcoholically. Yes, I was. And my poor parents, in their drug-free home, uh, you know, just they did what they had to do to make sure that I got to that treatment center. So I went to treatment. It was a facility that took in men and women, but we were separate. So men were on this side of the facility, women on the other side, and we would come together at lunch. And the way that they circumvented any interaction was that the girls went to meals first, and then 20 minutes later, the boys did, so that nobody would be in line or crisscrossing at the same time. We were not allowed to talk to each other. Well, I met the man of my dreams walking down the hallway in that treatment center. And so I wrote him a letter and told him how much I loved him. And when we got out of treatment, we were going to be together. And he wrote me a letter back. And so it was true love. And then one of his roommates found my letter and took it to a counselor, and I got kicked out of treatment. Um, so I get kicked out 2 weeks in. So I've detoxed at this point, but that's it. Um, my parents are super concerned, as they should have been. And I'm like trying to be like, I got it. We're good. Like, I got this. I know what to do. I'm going to go to AA meetings. Everything's fine. And the first meeting that I went to was Saturday Night Cheers, which is still my home group to this day. So I went there. My dad came with me, I think because he felt like he had to, but also to support me. And I was in the program for a while, not really doing what I needed to do to stay sober, right? So I didn't stay sober. And I should say, I have a history of anxiety, which we talked about, chronic pain issues. I have ovarian cysts. I have my whole life. And so I have these things that like are legitimate, and there are medications for those ailments, right? But at that point in my life, I didn't really want to be sober. And it wasn't a conscious thought, right? This is all subconscious. But I went to the doctor for my anxiety and I get medication. And now it's impossible for me to use the medication as prescribed and to not take other substances, right? The switch had been flipped. So I, of course, start connecting with all the wrong people at work. I meet a gal who is like a patient at a pain clinic, and she gets oxys like a bunch every month. She doesn't take them, so I buy them from her. We start drinking. I start doing crystal, and I'm just off to the races. And I think that my parents think that I'm still sober. I was living with them. I don't know how I thought that they didn't know, but I didn't. The ego of an addict and an alcoholic is unmatched. So one day I run out of prescriptions and I start detoxing. And the quantities of medications that I was taking throughout my entire history, when I would detox, I told a friend once, like, it feels like my skeleton is jumping out of my body and running down the road. Like, if you can imagine that feeling, that's what detox is like for me when I'm coming off of benzos and opiates. And so I grab a fifth of vodka in my boyfriend at the time, his freezer, new boyfriend. I just, kind of hopped all around. Um, and I started drinking it. And I called a friend who was in Alcoholics Anonymous around my age, and I told her what I was doing and where I was. And she called an ambulance and had the ambulance come to his house, apartment, and pick me up. And so I come to in the hospital with my dad standing over me. And the second I open my eyes, I say, Dad, I need to go to treatment. So Jamie saying I need to go to treatment became I'm in way too much trouble to get out of without a big move, right? So the big move is treatment. Um, this time, though, I wasn't going to a swanky treatment facility. I went to Providence, and the people that I was in there with were scary. I was in there with people that had feeding tubes and hitting their heads against the walls in the middle of the night. And uh, it was a scary realization for me to look at those people and to know that I belong there. Yeah, so that treatment center was only 2 weeks. It was also male and female, but we could interact. So while I was there, I found another boyfriend. And this one got to be my boyfriend because he was sneaking muscle relaxers into treatment. So I thought this is a good one. So I stayed at his apartment all the time. He would leave. I would go in and steal his benzos. And then, we'd come home in the evening. Then he'd give me pills to take. It was a very symbiotic relationship, I guess. So we break up, and I don't really remember what happened much after that. I know that I was in the program for a long time, a few years, I guess, claiming sobriety and not being sober. And for the majority of this time, I was the secretary of my home group. And so I was a patient myself at this time at a pain clinic. So I was getting morphine. And, a month's prescription would be gone in 4 or 5 days. And I would have to save a couple for the last day of the month because the pain clinic UA'd me every time I went in. And so I had to have the medication in my system. So save for 2 pills, it would be gone in a few days. And I was still connected with that gal that I used to work with. So I was getting her oxys from her pain clinic. And our 2-month-long high-powered opiate prescriptions were not enough to get me through more than 2 weeks. At this time, I started dating my now husband, and he thought that I was sober. He had been in sobriety, relapsed, had a breakup, came back to the program, and we met. And I had told him that I had 6 months sober, I think. This is one of those hazy memories, right? I can't remember if I told him I had 6 months or 3 months. Either way, I had more time than he did. And so we moved in together the night of our first date. We tell our kids all the time that does not work. Do not, do not move in with somebody your first date. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So moved in together. I'm still taking prescriptions, but I'm still, doing this song and dance like I'm sober. I'm a secretary. I go to meetings every night. I take people to meetings, blah, 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 And he one day asked me for a pen. Hey, do you have a pen in your purse? And I was like, or no, he said, hey, do you have a pen? And I said, yeah, in my purse. And then I realized what I had said. And I said, never mind, I'll get it. And my reaction to that sparked some concern. And so he looked in my purse and found my prescriptions. And he's also a really good codependent. So he decided that he could fix me. So we stayed together. I went through a horrendous detox. Went back into the rooms, took a 24-hour coin and started over again. Um, and this time I found a doctor who he was going to prescribe lorazepam, which is a longer lasting benzo than what Xanax is. And the doctor explains it to my husband and I. Well, this means that she won't have to take as many each day. And so it shouldn't be habit forming. Yeah, it was very, I can't make it make sense. Right? But that's what he said. And for some reason, my husband, even being in the program, took that for truth. And we left with a prescription of lorazepam. And he was also writing a week at a time. But like the thought was that the week's prescription would last 30 days. But he never questioned me on the fact that they weren't, right? That every week I was getting it refilled. And at this point, I'm hiding it from my husband. He knows that I have the prescription. He doesn't know how much I'm taking. I'm lying about it. I'm going to meetings, proclaiming sobriety. It's just this horrible cycle. And so it was a Thursday evening. My husband was at work. I was coaching my daughter's soccer team, and practices were on Thursday. And I was hanging out at my parents' house to wait for practice to start. And I missed the mark that night. I thought I was taking enough to feel good, and I took so much that I couldn't stay awake. So I missed soccer practice. Luckily, she was at her dad's house. And there was an assistant coach who was our oldest daughter. So she had to take over practice, not knowing what to do or where I was. And I woke up at 7 o'clock in the evening on my parents' couch. And they're not home yet, thank God. I know that my husband gets home from work at 7:30. And I have it in my head that as long as I'm home before he is, he won't know how intoxicated I am. If I'm sitting on the couch and he walks in and I can say hi, there's not much to analyze there, right? But if I have to walk in the door and deal with the dogs and put my purse down, there's a lot of room for error on my part. So I'm trying to beat him home. And I'm going through North Plains, which is where we still live today. And there's one four-way stop in North Plains. And leading up to that point, it's a 2-lane rural highway, and the speed's 55. Not a lot of passing lanes. And I was asleep for the majority of that drive. The police had told me that they had numerous calls on me, and I'm so grateful to those people that did call. There's people that I wish that I could see and thank, and those are some of the people. So I get pulled over at the four-way stop, and I get out of the car, and I don't smell like alcohol. I haven't been drinking, right? I've taken the last of my prescription. There's nothing on me. And I get out of the car, and the cop starts doing a field sobriety test, and I fail. And, I'm just tired. I'm super tired, officer, And my husband drives past me getting handcuffed on his way home from work. And so he comes over, and he's super confused because I'm sober, right? And so the cop says, we're taking her to jail. You can get her later. And so my husband went home, took our dog, who was in my back seat, the one that we talked about earlier, and I went to jail. So up until this point, I had no DUIs, not because I didn't drive intoxicated, but because I never got caught, And I remember sitting in the rooms for the first sobriety attempts and thinking like, well, I haven't gotten a DUI. And it's not that I thought like I was different than these people, because I knew that getting a DUI was a yet, right? Um, but it wasn't lost on me that I got a DUI while in Alcoholics Anonymous. Um, and yeah, it's interesting that that's part of my story. But anyway, so I went to jail, or got booked, whatever, mugshot, fingerprints, and they had me blow in that little machine like 5 times because it kept coming up zero. And clearly I am intoxicated. There's no way around it. So they asked me if they could do a blood test, and I said yes. So they did the blood test and they couldn't hold me. So they called my husband. He came, picked me up, and drove me to my parents' house. He was like, I don't know what to do with you. You're your parents' problem. So I went there. The next day I got up. I was with my dad all day. He was like dragging me around doing all these chores, he was just afraid to leave me on my own. Um, and so then my husband had his oldest daughter pick me up to take me to a meeting. And she handed me a big book and said, "This is from Dad." And I walked into the meeting with all of my friends. These are all people that I had seen the night before, right? Like in a meeting, Jamie's sober. And I'm still wearing the same clothes I was wearing the day before. And it just, I remember that moment walking in that room. There's not very many moments that I remember so clearly, but that one I do. And people are like, "Hey, Jamie, how's it going?" And I'm like, "Oh my God, you're never going to believe this. I got a DUI, but I was just tired." I walked into a room full of alcoholics who know how to lie better than anyone and assume that I could lie to them. Again, my ego was just completely out of control, right? And so I sat there and attended the meeting, and then I went home to my husband, and he had a drug test for me to take that he had bought at Walgreens or whatever. And so I take the drug test and it comes up positive for benzos. And we're in the kitchen, and one of our other daughters was in the kitchen, and it comes up positive with the line for benzos, and it's really faint. And he's like, "This says positive, right?" And I'm like, "No, it's not positive. That doesn't say positive." I'm looking at our other daughter. I'm like, "Does that say positive to you? Do you see a line?" And poor girl, right? What mother is going to drag their child into this? But I had to defend myself. And so we're arguing about the drug test. And then I'm like, "Well, maybe I do see a line, but it's probably just a faulty drug test. You need to get another one." And so he had followed me into the bedroom, and we're arguing about this drug test. And he asked me one more time, "Are you sober?" And this is like where it gets really emotional for me, because like I couldn't stand under the weight of all of the lies that I had been carrying anymore. And I physically collapsed on the bed and I said no. And the relief that I felt, from just being honest, I really feel like when I think about that moment, I feel like I was in this dark hole, right? And for the years of lying and all of these things, right? It just kept burying me more and more and more. Like my life was so dark. And just in that moment when I said, "No, I'm not," like all of a sudden there was a little bit of light. And I just knew that it was going to be okay. And my husband, when he loves to share it on my birthday, he'll say, "That was the best moment of our relationship because I thought Jamie was crazy and I didn't know how to deal with crazy, but I know how to deal with fucked up." And So from that moment, my life completely changed. So I went to court. I pled guilty for my DUI. I knew that this time I had to lay a foundation. I couldn't manipulate with no contest or not guilty. I had to be honest. And so I pled guilty. I went to diversion and I started actually working the steps. I got a sponsor. Um, I got involved in service work, and I started repairing the damage too. Um, for me, I can remember so many nights like driving home through this whole craziness of not being sober and just talking to God, in my car. Like, I don't know how to get out of this. I'm not strong enough to just walk into a room of Alcoholics Anonymous unpressured and be like, ta-da, just joking, guys, right? Um, but I could walk into a room and say that I got a DUI. And I don't know why that was easier for me. So today I am the secretary at Cheers again, which is a really cool experience for me. One of my biggest guilts during that time in my life was that I sat in the front of that meeting and was supposed to be an example of sobriety to other women coming into the rooms, and I was not. And so today I get to sit in the front of the room, and I feel like I get to make an amends to Alcoholics Anonymous and to the meeting every week. I get to undo some of the damage that I did. Um, My husband and I just had our first grandchild. He will be 7 months old in a week, and I would not have him if I wasn't sober. It is such a joy to be able to experience a baby and to be confident in what I'm doing with him. I almost feel like I get to redo my daughter. My husband and I have 4 children together. I have one biological, and he has 3 from a previous relationship. And so my biological daughter, I didn't really talk about her much in the previous, in my drinking days. That girl, she went through hell with me. She would sneak food under her bed and eat it in the middle of the night because I would get drunk and pass out and couldn't feed her. And then the next day, or later in the week when we're cleaning her room and I find cheese slice wrappers under her bed, I'd think it was funny, and being sober and looking at that for what it really was, that's not funny. That's my daughter didn't have food, you know? So she and I have an amazing relationship today, absolutely amazing. And I say it all the time. If my like failures and successes and all of the things that I did, if they mean that my child doesn't have to live through that, I would do it over again a million times. And so far, she saw what her mom was like and has decided not to go down that path. She's 25 years old and just bought her first home, and I am so incredibly proud of her. I was 40 before I was able to put my name on a home. So life is good. I just recently graduated college with my associate's degree. And I did that while working full time for a Fortune 500 company. And my husband and I own our own business. So yeah, that probably was one of the biggest accomplishments, I think, just for me personally. And now I just am staying home and taking care of the business and the grandkid and just enjoying life. But to finish school, to go to college, I tried to go to college 4 times. That was like always my thing that I was going to do to prove that like I'm okay. I can be successful. I'm going to go to college. And I wouldn't even last a term. I mean, when I decided to go this time, I had so many back fees for like classes that like I didn't pay for or didn't go to or whatever. Um, so I graduated with a 3.89, which I always thought that I wasn't smart. I thought like I got bad grades in school because I wasn't smart. That's not true, you know? So I love in this life of sobriety, I get to prove myself wrong. All of these things that my alcoholic had told me, um, you know, they're not true. And how cool is it to be able to see that, you know? I think one of the biggest gifts and what has allowed me to get sober, to remain sober for this 15 years and counting, hopefully, um, is my connection with God. And I think it's important that I talk about this because, I came into the program of Alcoholics Anonymous as Satanist. I worship Satan. The guy that I dated, that bartender, he had a satanic Bible. And I thought, well, shit, this looks good. Um, a chameleon, right? It never mattered what Jamie wanted or believed. It was always what's going to help me fit in with you better. So when I came to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous and I saw all this stuff about God, I was like, how am I supposed to do that? Right? Like I went from I hate God to now you're telling me God's it. Like I got to rely on this. And I think that my quest for finding God, whatever, however I was going to put those two things together and make it work. I think that that is what kept me drunk and high. That's what led to all of my relapses. I was so busy looking for something that I wasn't allowing it to happen. And so today I have God in my life and I was about 3 months sober this time and my sister had her son. And everybody in my family for a long time had hid all of their prescriptions from me, and I would always find them and steal them. That's just what I did. My poor dad, I remember for a long time, he would put his prescriptions in a waterproof necklace and wear it in the shower because that was the only way that it was safe. And so I went to my sister's house and she had a brand new baby and she's pumping milk and she's like, Jay, can you get me a glass of water? Yeah, sure. So I go into the kitchen and I'm pouring her glass of water and I look up on the windowsill above the sink and there's a prescription for Vicodin. And in every situation that I had found an opiate or a benzo in front of me, I have always taken them. Even if I didn't want to. I was compelled to. I had to. There was no option for me not to. And so I'm staring at this bottle. I know that my sister can't get up. I'm 3 months sober. And I'm arguing with myself. I don't want to. Well, just in case, right? Just in case was always my thing. Just in case you need it. Well, just in case always happened like 2 seconds later. As soon as those were in my hand, it was just in case. So I'm having this argument, and all of a sudden, I say, I don't want to. And I hear, then don't. And it was something so simple that there's no way it came from me. That was not me. I overcomplicate everything. And the feeling that came with that was just warmth, right? I just knew. And so that was the first time that I was able to walk away without that substance in my pocket, right? And it's also how I was able to connect with the God that I have today, right? I can't tell you what that God looks like. I can't tell you what that God sounds like, but I can tell you how I feel when I'm connected. And I can tell you how I feel when I'm not. And that, for me, also helped me kind of bridge the gap in my mind with everybody saying, God's always been with you. Well, if God's always been with me, why didn't I know it? right? Like, how did I not know, but I'm supposed to know right now? Like, it doesn't make sense to me. But when I break it down to a feeling, I've always known, right? All those things that I was doing, every pill that I stole, I knew, every time I did something good, I knew. And so that's been probably the biggest thing for me is just, and the fact that I can say, like, I have a God and not worry about what you think my God is, right? That used to be a big thing for me too. Like, I don't want you to think that I'm like some like Bible thumper, whatever. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I was always concerned about what you would think based on what I said. And today I don't, right? It's very freeing.
Wow, Jamie, thank you so, so much for just coming in today and telling your story.
Yeah.
And man, what an amazing story. And it's, what's wild is that I remember that meeting that you came into, that when you came in and you had gotten the DUI. And just, I'm just so happy that you're like here and still sober, and you're a miracle.
Thank you.
And, yeah. So do you have any advice that you would share to a newcomer that was maybe just newly getting sober?
Yeah. For me, I know like this isn't an Alcoholics Anonymous podcast, but that's what I know.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, if somebody asks me how to get sober, that's going to be my answer is you get your butt in a chair
Mm-hmm.
and you connect with people, right? You listen, and don't think yourself out of sobriety.
Yeah.
Just allow it to happen, grab on to people. If you don't know what to do, then just hold on,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think that's another gift in sobriety is the ability to pause. You don't have to make a decision today, right? So go to a meeting, don't drink in between meetings, and, find people that you connect with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great advice.
Thanks.
Well, thank you again for coming in today, Jamie. I just
Thank
love
you.
you so much.
Oh, I love you too.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Jaywalkers Recovery Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please give us a 5-star review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. You can also join us on YouTube or Facebook for some bonus videos and pictures. Thanks again for tuning in.